I've been trying to be more vulnerable here in many ways, especially in the last set of videos where I'm trying to share, which is scary, my own personal journey in a way that helps hopefully you understand these concepts and then apply them to your own life. Because as I've thought about some of the most interesting people in this field that I've followed, especially those who talk about trauma, is really all of them do share their personal stories about their trauma in many ways. And yet what you don't know is that so many of us, who you may not know, have been taught, were originally taught to never self-disclose and to only self-disclose with intention, which I do generally follow that as a therapist in a one-on-one situation. But this whole world where I'm now sharing content potentially where my patients are watching it, it's weird. I think it's weird for them too. And I hope that they will bring it up, though I'm guessing they won't, and I probably wouldn't either. And I'm not sure if I would want to know about my therapist's life. Many of them that found me long before, and I do tend to keep patients for a long time, even if they come and go, and I prioritize those patients, but I'm also making space for new patients. The older patients that found me, for many reasons, didn't find me online, right? I only started making content like this just before the pandemic. And so those patients, of course, many of them don't even know I'm on TikTok, which is just funny. I had a patient that I've been working with for about the last 5 years who is a pretty savvy, client in terms of their career, but they're not going to be on therapy TikTok. And so anyway, I want to acknowledge that it's weird. And yet those of you who found me this way, it's also been a beautiful bridge to finding new patients and connecting with you all. And so I want to just say, though, that this whole self-disclosure thing is my whole point. It's difficult. And so I hope it's helpful. It seems like it is. And I think it helps me talk about these concepts in a more vulnerable and real way, because I've never liked videos where it's like the person is just reading from the text. And you can feel it. They're giving you the data, but it's like, okay, but how does that really apply in my own life? And so that's what I'm doing. And nowhere has that been more true, especially on TikTok, where I've been talking more and more about this potential of the idea of me having high masking autism. And even saying it out loud, I'm like, oh, I've kind of been leaning in and leaning out. And I just did a podcast last weekend, my first one really. I've been asked to do several, and I just have been sort of scared and not ready. And this person reached out, and it happened to be Kristen Hovet, who had written the article about the 5 signs you may be a misdiagnosed autistic woman. And so I hope you'll check that out. I'll link it down below. It was really a lovely conversation. I don't know that you're going to find out a whole lot. It's not like I'm imparting all this wisdom, but what we do talk about is just kind of like what's been my experience, both as a person questioning this diagnosis and also being on the other side of it as a psychologist. And we talk about things like narcissism and family issues and things like that. So I hope you'll check it out. And also go follow Kristen on her YouTube channel and on TikTok, which she just joined recently. But I want to share this idea around female autism. And I want to preface this by saying, as I keep saying, is you should not use any of these videos. And I honestly don't believe that autistic people would ever watch one video and go, I'm autistic. Like, I think what I've heard is how many people come to appointments with, tabs and articles and research. And so, but I think it's important to be said. The criticism is like, oh, everyone is autistic and diagnosing themselves. And sure, there can be certain things where people align with, but I do think we're, and I keep saying this, at the very beginning of understanding this topic. And so the reason why I want to talk about female autism with the disclaimers of that, A, do not use this video to diagnose, and B, with the disclaimer that there is no such thing as female autism for most people. They believe that, you're autistic or you're not, and there's a wide variety of spectrum traits you can have. But because of the really significant lack of research on every population that is not, frankly, white males, we don't really know what it looks like in those other populations. That being said, I think, and maybe the autistic community will disagree with me, and I want to honor and hear that, but what concerns me about not talking about what has been called the female phenotype of autism, or at least acknowledging it and saying anyone can have this female presentation, anyone. No matter how you identify, no matter who you are, you can also have this presentation. So that's important. But what I want to say is, if we don't talk about it, what I worry about is that because the nuances of these presentations of high masking symptoms and what I've been reading about was what pulled me in to make me start to want to do research and read books like Neurotribes and Unmasking Autism, and as I've shared, many other books on Asperger's, which is an older book. We don't use the term Asperger's for the most part, though some do like that term still. Tony Attwood's books on female autism, all kinds of things like that. So if we don't talk about these presentations, I worry that those who are in this field, like me, who are clinicians, who are only using the DSM, and they've only been exposed to a very brief introduction of autism, and they don't specialize in autism, have no idea that they could be sitting across from somebody in their office who is high masking with these qualities. And so because of that, that opened my eyes that there could be a female autism that could look different, a high masking autism. And that's what I want to share from Devin Price's book on Unmasking Autism. Now, if you'll even notice here, it says female autism in quotes, because what Devin is saying is that while many therapists might have this, I would argue that most don't. I would argue that the majority of therapists, unless they are on TikTok, to be honest, autism specialists, or going out of their way to understand what is going on, because it takes a lot of additional reading and research and video watching and TikTok watching of autistic creators, and it's so much more than reading the DSM. And so I believe that it's important to talk about this type of presentation and what it might look like. Because I think without it, you would think that autism is what the DSM says only, and you would picture the classic stereotypical white child, male child, playing with trains and rocking back and forth. And I think that that is important to acknowledge the very varying degrees of it for those who that does fit. But what about all of those who are also on the spectrum who it doesn't fit? So I want to go through, and I've made several videos, as you might want to go back and check on this topic, but Devin talks about traits commonly associated with female autism. Once again, I'm going to slow down. Traits commonly associated with female autism. And Devin talks about also that, historically speaking, that autistic meltdowns have been written off for girls and female children as being emotional outbursts, and that their symptoms are different, that girls are exposed to social dynamics and social rules and learn to do things like fake eye contact and fake playing with, playing house in a way that is very different from boys, and that all of that is impactful. So let's go through the categories. The categories are emotional, psychological, behavioral, and social. So the first one is emotional. So these are, once again, traits commonly associated and what it might look like, this collection of symptoms in a female phenotype presentation. Emotional. Strikes others as emotionally sensitive and immature. Prone to outbursts or crying jags, sometimes over seemingly small things. Has trouble recognizing or naming one's feelings. May become disturbed or overwhelmed when others are upset, but uncertain how to respond or support them. Ignores or suppresses emotions until they bubble up and explode. Goes blank and seems to shut down after prolonged socializing or when overstimulated. Now, all of those, with the exception of the immature, I had initially chalked up all of those things to complex PTSD. And as I've done this dive more and more, it seems that complex PTSD seems to pretty much inherently go hand in hand with especially undiagnosed autism, but really autism on any level, on any relational level. So you think about the potential, let's say in the perfect world, you're born with these qualities, you have very nurturing, very present, very aware, understanding parents who are somehow perfect in their setting up the world for you, which of course they're not, but let's say they really try to being born into a family with a lot of chaos, parents who can't emotionally regulate, parents who may be undiagnosed autistic themselves, or have other disorders that have been diagnosed or misdiagnosed, like narcissism, borderline, bipolar, things like that. And so the problem is these symptoms by themselves, I think if you're not aware of how it can all connect taking in the DSM as well, but just not alone, under the umbrella. So it's like it's all of this plus that. It's not one or the other, if that makes sense. The second one is psychological. Reports a high degree of anxiety, especially social anxiety. Is perceived by others as moody and prone to bouts of depression. May have been diagnosed with mood disorders such as bipolar or personality disorders like borderline, NPD, narcissism, before autism was discovered. Fears rejection intensely and tries to manage how other people feel to avoid it, and has an unstable sense of self, perhaps highly dependent upon the opinion of others. Now think about those, how those might go under the umbrella of complex trauma, social anxiety, borderline, things like that. Behavioral. Uses control to manage stress. Follows intense self-imposed rules despite having an otherwise unconventional personality. Is usually happiest at home or in familiar, predictable environments. Seems youthful for their age in looks, dress, behavior, or interests. Prone to excessive exercise, calorie restriction, or other eating disordered behaviors. And by the way, EDs are very common, can be with autism. Neglects physical health until it becomes impossible to ignore. Self-soothes by constantly fidgeting, listening to repetitive music, twirling hair, picking at skin or cuticles, nails, things like that. So that would be stimming, right? The picking, the self-soothing. And so that's important. And lastly, social. Is a social chameleon, adopts the mannerisms and interests of the groups they're in. May be highly self-educated but will struggle with social aspects of their career. Can be very shy or mute, yet become very outspoken when discussing a subject they're passionate about. Struggles to know when to speak when in large groups or at parties. Does not initiate conversations but can appear outgoing and comfortable when approached. Can socialize but primarily in shallow, superficial ways that may seem like a performance. Struggles to form deeper friendships. Has trouble disappointing or disagreeing with someone during a real-time conversation. And I want to read this part to you. It says this in Devon's book. There's a particular way the neurotype of autism tends to present among people who only discovered their identity of autism late in life. We tend to be emotionally withdrawn, yet friendly and socially adaptive. We're social chameleons and masters at making people like us, but we never let much of our real selves show. We erect rigid rules around our lives to manage stress and make an unpredictable social world feel a little less scary. And this is sort of in italics. Make eye contact for this many seconds. Eat this easy to prepare meal at this time of day. Never talk about yourself for too long. Try as we might to be agreeable, people still comment on how oversensitive or immature we are, or imply we're hard to read. So there's lots of different dynamics that Devon talks about. And I was going to maybe not share this, but this just happened the other night. I'm taking a French class with my daughter because I want to learn to speak French. And I'm having some medical issues that have been going on pretty significantly for the last several months. And they've been escalating with a lot of important and concerning and stressful things. And I had unfortunately scheduled my day I had 3 different medical appointments and very upsetting appointments and exams and stuff. And then I had French class that night. And I hadn't had any doubt. I had literally been gone from my house since 8:30 that morning. For me, I have to plug back in, come home. But because of the appointments and things going on, I couldn't. And then I had French class at 5 with my daughter. So then I was out all day out. We had a quick meal and we went to class. And in the class, you have to, which is like an introvert / masked autist nightmare, but also good, is you have to go around the room and speak French. Like every exercise, for the most part, involves you speaking to the teacher or speaking it to other people. And there was a point where we were supposed to take this paper and go around and we had to, normally we're in a group and we rotate and we know what we're supposed to do. And there was a point where we have this paper, and it's birthdays, and it's all in French, and you're supposed to go around and have each person, you have to guess when their birthday is, and you have to keep asking them in French. Is it this month? Is it that month? And they say oui, no, whatever. And so I was kind of doing it, and the idea that I had to get up and go around and seek out different people was like, I just felt panicked. It's kind of embarrassing. And my daughter, who's also extremely shy, who's been doing great, and this is a course she has to take for high school. And so when you take one semester of community college in California of a language, you get 2 years of credit for a language for high school. So anyway, she was doing it, and she was asking somebody something, and I went up to her, and I was kind of like, I didn't know what to do with myself. And she's like, you're gonna like go do your own thing, right? It was funny because usually she's the one kind of like clinging to me. I was like, yeah. Oh yeah, I'll do that. But like the nature of having to go, and this is also just in general my social anxiety and stuff, I ended up somehow next to the French teacher. And I won't go into the details, but in the matter of like 2 minutes, I had emailed her because I had missed the first class because of a surgery I'd had, and so she kind of knows what's going on. But basically, I just blurted out like the most, like, this is what's happening, and blah blah blah. Like, and I could see her face, like, oh my god, I was having a hot flash. This is all related to hormones, and so I was having a hot flash, and I go, oh, I'm having a hot flash, and she's like, oh, and she starts to like talk about that, and I end up just like oversharing the trauma of my day and the whole thing, and I was horrified, like so much shame, so horrified. What are you doing? And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I got in the car that night. Do I email her and apologize? I mean, and then I was like, okay, like this is, now you're taking it a whole nother level. But what I want to share with you is that how much these events affect so many aspects of our lives. And prior to understanding that, that maybe you have these things going on, I don't know that I could have fully explained that with complex PTSD, because the complex PTSD I've had in its own little pockets, there's medical trauma with my daughter or whatever, the relational dynamics with doctors, there's family trauma with my parents, there's ex-husband trauma, there's trauma with my kids and their struggles and things they've been through. But the point is, like, understanding that, it helped me the next day. I stayed in kind of a shame spiral about it. And the next day I was able to like, okay, this is how your brain works. This is why you did this. You are making it a much bigger deal. I'm sure she is. Like, let it go. But my point is that all of that, the having to like talk about shallow conversations, and initiate connection, be vulnerable and speak a language I've literally, except for traveling to France a lot, not learned to speak. And then having the trauma of the day, honestly, without being able to go home and regulate, I think that is what set me up the most, is that for so many people that have these, that I've met with, to be honest, with qualities, I'm kind of like stuttering here, but like, is that part of our way of what I'm learning is that because of our sensitivity and our sensories and our sensory issues, that can make us feel a lot more spirally. And that what helps that is like, for example, the combinations of slowing down, giving yourself space between events to like let your nervous system relax. And so that's a huge thing of what I'm doing now, is trying to build more time into my day and more space. But I can see how my own panic from the day, from meeting with, doctors and having more surgeries planned and all things like that, it was very upsetting, and I had not given myself the space to deal with it. And then it just wasn't possible that day. But I could not regulate that. I could fake that I'm fine to regulate the class, but not to manage that overspill with her. And then I couldn't put the stuff back in the bottle. And then just the last thing is, we were walking out of the classroom, my daughter and I, with this lovely older woman who literally said she had last practiced French 56 years ago. Like, it's amazing that she's in there. The class is just this range of people, and they're all really lovely. And she said something, and I had offered to walk her to her car, because she had mentioned earlier in the night that, she's older and it starts to get dark. And I was like, oh, we'll walk you to your car. And so we happened to be walking out, and I was like, oh, we can walk you to your car. And so she's like, oh, I'm there. And I'm like, oh, we're right next to you. And we're chatting, and I'm really trying to like hold it together after this spiral. And then she said something that was very reflective of her generation. And I just blurted out, I blurted out something that in retrospect was kind of rude. And I really didn't mean it. It just came out. It wasn't like to her, it was like me saying something like, well, we don't do that anymore to our kids. That's the gist of it. And my daughter was like, Mom, you didn't say goodbye. Like, it was just bad. And I was like, oh my God. And so it goes back to me talking about, as I mentioned in some videos, and I think I've done it more on TikTok, is like when you have some of these struggles, you can be misperceived as being the B word, rude, and not meaning to. Like here I was trying so hard to like make her feel safe to the car, holding in all of that stuff that the night, and then basically maybe like walking away and just saying this thing to her that probably didn't make her feel great, like I was judging her, and then I walked in my car. So I guess I say all this just to share with you like how many of these things can be understood, but through the lens of understanding high masking, it is helping me say whatever's going on with your brain, regardless of if it's this or that understanding that these certain things are really hard for you and you need to work harder at building in ways to manage your life and day, and also to have more grace and self-compassion and to try to just, understand yourself more. And that helps the shame. So anyway, I know it was a long story at the end, but I thought, I don't know, I think it's good to see how these seem like little things, but I felt horrified I'd overshared. I felt horrified that for 1 second when I walked away that she felt like I was saying something rude, because like I've said, I feel like my biggest challenge in life, one of them has been me being overly nice and not setting enough boundaries and not leaning into conflict. I mean, I've gotten a lot better at it. I'm sure those who've been on the other end of it in the last 10 years, like through my divorce and things, would disagree. But the point is that it's always been hard. I felt like I've been a fawner, a pleaser, a compulsive caretaker. And so now that I'm aware of it, it's almost like it's better and it's worse, but it's helping me understand. But I just feel like we have to talk about it, because when you read all of that, it feels like something way different than, you would think, oh, could that collection of things be autism? Yes, absolutely. That collection of presentation of symptoms could be a high masking person with autism. So, okay. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. Please don't forget to check out Kristen's podcast. And I'm about to start. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm really ready to start doing hopefully interviews in like a podcast YouTube version. So we'll see if that comes to fruition, but I'm very excited about that, where I want to do some really deep dives on people's lives and hopefully on topics that you'll find helpful. So thanks for being here. Please stay safe and well, and lots of self-compassion for you if you've done any degree of some version of what I shared. So much worse, so much less. Just know that you're not alone. Okay, stay safe. Bye.